I want to talk a little bit about robots and human behavior. The major difference between cybernetic organisms and human systems. A lot of people think that programming is exactly the same in people and robotics. It is not. The major difference is that you can design a robot to walk over, pick up an object, put it in another place. But if the robot, before it even moves, if you put the object in the place the robot was going to put it in, it would still walk over and grab nothing in particular. Do you understand that? That's programmed. The difference between human systems and robots, it's not linear. That means that the robot can do certain things that you program into it. And if you look at that under a microscope, you can see magnetic domains that'll make the robot walk over to a given area and sit in a chair. If you pull the chair away, the robot will walk over and sit on nothing and fall over. That's programmed. The human system differs considerably. It has, when you work on a human being, let's put it this way, or a chimpanzee, or any animal. I'll work with the chimp this time. I'll have put the chimp in a box, a big box, and in that box are rods sticking out different lengths with a cue, a circle, triangle on one of them, different patterns. And you don't have to teach it anything. It'll walk in and sooner or later it'll touch those things. When it touches any one of them, water will come forth. Touches another one, food. Touches another one, a soft bed comes out of the wall. If the animal is put there for a long enough time, it will use those rods appropriately. Any animal has a range of behavior. When put in an environment, it doesn't respond like a robot. It looks at the environment and seeks reinforcement, food. If the leaves are circular where the food is, it'll go to the circular leaves. That's called associative memory. Programmed computers have no associative memory. They follow a pattern. So if you look at a phonograph record with a microscope, you'll see zigzags cut in the Bakelite record. Those zigzags are representation of the voice of a person. While the record is playing, that if it's somebody singing Caruso or somebody else, can't deviate from those patterns. Robots that are programmed can't deviate from those programs unless you have a path alongside of it. And you show variations, and instead of a circle, slight ellipse. The animal will touch that thing thinking it's a circle because they're not that critical, and it gets burnt slightly. So it will never touch that one again. That's what the animal has that the robot doesn't have. If the robot touches something and it doesn't reinforce it, how do you reinforce a robot? If he gets stung, that wouldn't bother him at all. But a robot can learn to respond to different figures. When he sees a triangle, presses a button, he gets lubricated. But he doesn't feel good when he gets lubricated. So there's no reason to retain that action. It's only when a human touches something and they feel good touching it that they repeat it. A robot cannot touch something and say, hey, that feels good. They can reach out, do that, and pull back, but they can't make anything of it. Do you understand that? The reason I say, do you understand that, is because there's so much conflict today about robots and people. Will robots take over? Not if they're programmed not to take over. If they're programmed to take over, they can only shoot a guy in a certain uniform. And if the guy stays put in a given area, the robot can walk over. Unless you condition the robot through the eyes to follow anything that moves and shoot it. Is a robot an assassin? No. It's programmed to shoot. That's quite different. Human beings have, some people believe, 10 to 15 billion neurons. A robot has hundreds of thousands of associates, not billions. So if you learn that a cup gives you water, anything that looks like a cup might support water. We can deviate from our programming. Our programming appears rigid, but alongside of it is associative memory. That I touched that and I felt pain. I touched the other thing and I didn't feel pain. I got something. The robot never looks at a thing and says, that's interesting. If you were to float midair in front of a robot with a, hey, now that is interesting. It can't do that. It can only do what it's programmed to do. A man can see things and be programmed and compare it to something else. Is that very clear? Or do you want to question anything there? That's a major difference between programmed behavior and human programming. Humans have a lot of associations prior to programming. So the other associations, if it reminds them of the other, he can deviate. That's why people walk out of here when I speak with different interpretations.
Kurzweil talks about implanting, when nanotechnology comes about, implanting something in the head that, like a second brain that may be so fast and that it could take over the other brain in the person. This is something he's raised.
Well, you can do that, but it's not. It doesn't give them leverage. Like, I wonder about that. I've never seen that happen. A man could say that. A man could look at an event and say, that's strange the way that paper holds up that speaker. A robot does not do that. It looks at the speaker. It doesn't even look at it and say, that looks like a speaker. Unless you put a speaker in front of the robot and say, that's a speaker. So when the eye sees it, it says, that's a speaker. When you turn it sideways, it doesn't know what that is. When you turn it sideways and say, that's also a speaker, if you rotate a speaker in many positions, so the robot has associations with the shape in different positions, you can call it a speaker. But if it'll call an orange, but if you cut it in half, it can't call it an orange. It doesn't say it looks like half an orange.
But
Do you understand that? Okay.
This thing that Kurzweil is putting out, like the singularity, is when you start to implant things in people's heads that have so many more calculating ability or...
If it is not connected to the other neurons, it won't do anything.
It couldn't take over.
No. Unless it's connected.
Well, he's proposing that it is connected somehow, that there is some interface between...
If there is an interface, organic neurons respond to a certain rate of speed. Anything beyond that rate, it can't respond. Electronic systems travel almost at the speed of light. Neural associations are relatively slow. So if you try to speed up digestion of food in a human, the digestive acids flow at a certain rate. If you were to triple the rate, it might digest portions of the intestines. Do you understand what I mean? You can take a bear, for example, let's take a bear and put it in a room this size with a bunch of objects sticking out. They have to stick out, 40 of them. A bear might learn how to use 12 of them, but not 40. It won't remember 40. It doesn't have the neuronal amount to remember. Well, a bear could remember, because when a bear walks through an environment, this bush has berries, and he remembers where the bush is. This area has animals that I can eat. A bear can build up maybe thousands of associations, but first you have to study the range of the animal. how many levers an animal can remember will tell you what its outside response will be. You find a bear can learn to work 47 levers. And beyond that, a little beyond that or a little less, if that's true, then you know what the bear can respond to in the environment. 40 different systems. A human can generate associations with thousands of things in the environment. If a human learns to eat certain food, and he has to climb a tree to get it, if you put that food at the base of the tree, he won't climb the tree. A robot will. Do you understand that? If you program a robot to climb a tree to get the apple, it'll do that. But if you put the apple on the ground, the robot says, that simplifies things. No, unless you build in something special in the robot to handle unforeseen variables. And that's what people don't know how to do yet. They don't know how to program a robot to say, what have we here? Because a robot, the word, what have we here, doesn't mean anything to a robot. It means something to a human being.
The roboticists and Kurzweil too are bringing up, when the robot does become connected to the environment and does have enough information that it would surpass people and overtake people.
A robot does not ask questions. A robot does not say, I've been here before, I've seen that before. They don't have enough neurons to build all kinds of associations.
Do you think it's possible that they can do that if they use biological?
Well, if it's programmed, no. But if a robot is self-programming, then the reason for a robot's actions are very different than human systems. When human puts something to his mouth, it tastes good. When a robot does nothing, there's no reward. Now, what's a reward to a robot? Sitting down, does it say, I'm so tired, and now I feel better? He doesn't feel. So when he sits down, he doesn't say, it's good to have a chair in my area. He doesn't give a shit about those things. If the light gets so bright that the eyes of the robot turn off, he says, I can't see, if you wire him that way. But he doesn't turn down the light unless you wire it that way. Then he turns down the light when it gets bright, but not because it's bright, because he has senses that turn off the light. Do you understand that difference?
You were explaining last night this in terms of humans have to have experience
Yes.
to
That means a
react.
robot doesn't seek experience. A robot doesn't want to know why some tires wear out faster than others. So he doesn't take a microscope and looks at the rubber under a microscope. A robot is not equipped that way. They don't have pleasure and pain. If they had pleasure and pain, if they did, they would have preferences. Do you understand? If a robot cuts wood with a rotary saw, all the wood is shoved in there, automatically cuts it. If you put a human there, he'll cut it too. He doesn't say, just a minute, that's a person. I don't want to cut that. The robot cannot do anything unless it's programmed to do it. And it could be programmed to cut wood, but it'll cut anything else shoved in there. If you interfere with its programming, it doesn't say, hey, now wait a while, you're interfering with program. If radar picks up fog in San Francisco, the airplane might fly above the weather. The airplane moves up based on what's out there. If it's fog, it moves up. But it doesn't move up to avoid the fog. That's human projection. The robot moves up because there was fog ahead. Its senses bounce back and give it a thing that controls the elevators and makes it move up. If it's raining, the robot may open an umbrella above itself. But when the raindrops hit the umbrella, they make contact with two terminals. So that flows across, that opens the umbrella. But the robot says, it's raining, I'm going to get wet, No, none of that. Do you understand that? I'm talking about robotics today. You can only say why the robots won't take on over today with what we know about robotics. But if they find a new system, I don't know about that, so I can't talk about it. If you can give machines feelings, I don't see how you do that with steel robotics. I can't see where a machine said to another machine, that was a nice thing you did, helping the old lady across the street, because that's a value system. You know what I mean? I might help anybody across the street that's having difficulty, not necessarily an old lady. But an old lady, you make a lot of assumptions. You see it as your mother or your grandmother, you help across the street. But if your grandmother was the biggest pain in the ass you ever met, you'd never help an old lady across the street. Do you understand that? Okay. So you say, what's the matter with that guy? I wouldn't help the old lady. Nothing's the matter with anybody. They all reflect their background. So when people say, do you think the robots will take over? There's no basis for it if they're programmed a certain way. They can't be programmed to take over.
Do you see any scenario where they will surpass people?
Yes, if you make organic people. Do you know what that means with feelings? If a guy eats something that's hot, he holds it away, and then he has to have enough neurons or enough electrical circuits to remember that when steam is coming out of a cup, it's too hot to put in your mouth. You have to build in equipment to receive that information. And that is not well understood today.
But you talk about if something from outer space comes here, they wouldn't be humanoid.
That's right.
So
They
do you
wouldn't
think-
care. They wouldn't want to talk to anybody. I want to say this about human beings. With all their neurons, they still will crowd maybe hundreds of thousands of people to see the king and queen. They will go places and wait all day, even if it's raining a little. They want to see the queen. Now the queen can never utter stuff that would be beneficial to them. The king can never say, by the way, if you turn your car this way, you get more miles per gallon. The king can never say anything of use. Yet these people gather to see a movie star. Or they'll gather to see somebody or want their autograph, which is a nothing thing. It just means that you've made contact with somebody. So people will crowd to see a baseball player, which can never say anything that will enhance their lives. Unless a kid says to the baseball player, how can I become good? Practice, lots of practice. Okay? And the kid can never hit the basket, then tell him to go to a neurologist, see if his nervous system is working properly. Man can do that. But no computer turns to another computer and says, what is your range of sensitivity? If you could do that to a computer and say, I can sense water falling, I can sense a ball falling, but if you move it too fast, my senses can only pick up 17 images per second. So if I met a robot, I would check its range. Then I know what it can do. How do you check its range? You put them in an environment and see how fast it makes adjustments for everything in that environment. Yes.
Do you think that robotics in some form, like you say, how they may come here, they'd be very different in some form, they could be the next step in evolution and surpass humans?
They will be the next step ever, but they have no reason to reproduce themselves as a robot. A man wants a family. He has an orgasm and that produces a person. He doesn't have sex to reproduce, although some people think they do. If sex were not pleasurable, animals would not reproduce. Animals don't know that having sex will produce offspring. They can't know that, yes.
So what is a human in a mechanistic sense?
A human has lots of range. If it didn't, it wouldn't exist. If you don't have the range to know that lava will burn you and kill you, and if there's a lava flow and you grin and sit there, your species is gone. But if you react to heat, if you have heat sensors in your fingers, you go away. They say, well, the man didn't want to get burnt, that's why he went away. No, he had heat sensors, and that made him back away. That's what I mean by mechanistic. If I say he backed away because he didn't want to be burnt, the kid drew his hand out of the fire because it hurt, that's true. But if the kid had no nerves, no heat sensors, the hand would remain on the fire and begin to smoke. And he'd grin. Do you understand that? Okay. So when I say human beings are responding organisms, so's a robot, but they're responding to a track. The human is responding to his background and his programming. Do
And
you
his
understand the difference?
physiology, yeah.
Yes, physiology and his programming. A human being, a robot will climb a hill no matter how high it is, and they'll wear out climbing there. A human being will go up 150 feet and say, boy, I gotta sit down and rest a while. See, because he can feel fatigue. A robot can't. Yes.
So you don't believe that it is possible to create a synthetic organism with such complexity that it could actually feel?
Yes, we could. But right now, the kind of organisms we have do not feel. They'd have to have long experience.
So what does it
And
mean
yeah.
to feel?
What I mean to feel, if the robot put lubricating oil and it felt good, just like you feel good when you eat. If you don't eat, you're hungry, you got no food. When you put something to your mouth, you tend to chew on it. Kids suck any part of the body. And when they get to the breast, they get milk. Now, why do men have breasts if there's purpose to everything? They don't feed the young. But they found out on certain islands, when men nurse babies, they eventually produce milk. Did you know that? Okay, that's interesting. Man is very different than a program. A program is a record turning with magnetic differences, and all the robot does is follow that programming. The robot cannot turn off unless the circuit breaks, unless you cut the wires. But a robot might even say, welcome to this house, have a seat. But if you stand and the robot's not programmed to say, I said have a seat, if you don't move to that direction. You can program the robot to say have a seat, but the robot doesn't feel good whether you're sitting or standing. It has no reason to perpetuate that action. But if you can give a robot feelings of some kind, or the equivalent of feelings, which is very hard to do without organic matter. It's organic sensors that have pain. Do you know what that means? A dog, if it goes up to a guy that offers the food and likes the dog will not go back. If you hold lubricating oil before a robot, it doesn't give a shit. It doesn't come up and say, I need lubrication. It can't, unless it's programmed to do so. If it's programmed to stick its hand out and then the lubricant is injected into it, it doesn't go there for lubrication. It goes there as a response to a certain shape, visual. If the robot, yes.
So can you make a robot with what they call an instinct for survival, per se?
Well, you can simulate a robot when ice particles, big ice checks, are falling from the skies. He can go like that, or he can pick up a stainless steel umbrella to prevent that from hitting him, but not for prevention of injury. The robot doesn't say, I did this because I don't want to be injured. I can make him say that when this thing is falling. You say, why did you open the umbrella? He says, I opened it because I didn't want to be injured. That's not true. That's a human pathway put in the brain.
Is it possible to create a robot with what you would term a consciousness or a sense of self?
No, we can only simulate it. Only if it's organic. Do you understand what I'm saying? A bear will not lie on a bunch of spikes sticking up, even though he's never encountered it. The spike sticking up to the bear, through associative memory, means pain. So he looks for soft grass. They say dogs turn around before they lie down. That's true, they do. They do turn around. But the people that study animal behavior believe, they honestly believe that the dog, over years of sitting in the grass, turned around to level the grass before they sat down. They can't inherit that. Do you understand that? Do you? The dog, if he turned around, so I interrupted dogs just before they sit down. After they turn around about to, I make a noise, and they turn around again, make a noise. I interrupted. Do you know, to see if the dog would just sit down anyway? No. And sometimes you call the dog over and then you chase it away. Then if you do that 4 or 5 times, it doesn't come to you when you call them. That's associative memory based on feelings, rejection, or whatever it may be, to a dog. And so if a robot got up one morning and said, the bed I was sleeping in was not comfortable, then it means they've attained that. I can't see that. I can see a robot saying, I'd rather have soft rubber. It can even squeeze it and say it's not soft enough. But that isn't real feelings. That's generated, or a role that they're playing. Just like a record says, good morning, welcome to Disneyland. There are many records at Disneyland. The record doesn't give a shit whether you're there or not. Every 20 minutes it says, welcome to Disneyland. Enjoy yourself and bring the kiddies next time. And the public say, how nice. They assume lots of things. Robots assume nothing. They carry out a program. So far. Now, production machinery, if you change, say it just fills perfume bottles with nozzles, 500 bottles at a time. If you brought milk bottles up there and said fill it with milk, you'd have to redesign the programming. So when the white substance passes a visual mechanism, the things absorb the milk and they eject it. The way that works is the nozzle goes into the bottle and it has another nozzle alongside of it, and it creates a vacuum. The one alongside of it is vacuum, the one here pours the milk in. As the milk fills up, it cuts the vacuum, so no more milk flows. I don't know if you understand that, do you? One tube sucks the air out of the bottle, and that brings milk into it. When it hits the tube that sucks the air out, it means it's full. So the machine doesn't say, I think the bottle is nearly full, and turns off a little in advance. No. There's no reflection in a robot. Like I said, I can make a robot that simulates reflection. If you whack it real hard, it can say, ouch, my knee. But that's impact that elicits that response. But the robot does not hurt. Do you understand that? No?
I just don't. I don't think I agree with you at this point, because where do you draw a line as what's robotic and what's organic? Because if you have an artificial heart, or what's stopping us from putting in nerve endings?
Yeah, if you
and
have an
neurons
artificial heart that's stimulated by the nervous system, it beats fast when you have to climb stairs. And when you climb stairs with an artificial heart, it doesn't beat faster to give you more circulation and oxygen, unless it's connected, unless it has responders in it to respond to more energy is required to climb up steps.
Say if we cut
It
something.
depends on the rig, but you can't make an inorganic heart, a mechanical heart that feels emotionally. Like if your pants drop, you cover yourself. In the islands, if a guy's jockstrap fell off, he doesn't cover himself. He doesn't feel embarrassment. People don't feel embarrassment if they're brought up nude. Embarrassment is a learned behavior. If a woman's top fell down, she'd go like that. But if she was brought up in a nudist colony, she wouldn't do that. So, do you still disagree with me?
I just,
You
as
want
far
to
as where we
understand more
are,
about it.
as far as where we are today,
That's what I'm talking about, where we are today.
how do we really know where we are today? Because the programmers, do you think
Well,
we really know what's the technology is capable of doing today?
If
Do
you
we have
know-
access to that
If
information?
you know how to check out human responses, otherwise you can't know. For example, what made me different? What made me think that robots can't do anything unless they're programmed to do so? Roboticists don't talk this way. They talk as though someday we'll be able to do almost anything. Well, that's a projection. It's crude. So what I did years ago is I made a robot that turned its head, but it never said yes, or never went through anything that I didn't wire in. If I took a model airplane and I wanted it to do a barrel roll, that means this, I had to work the ailerons at 150 feet. The robot had to have a gadget called air pressure manometer. It moves in as the air pressure changes. So at 100 feet, the ailerons would move. So it won't do a barrel roll near the ground. It'd break the wings off. But the robot, do you understand, when the ailerons move, it can do a barrel roll. If I wanted to do a loop, the elevators move. But it can't do a loop unless it's 200 feet off the ground, because it'll hit the ground on the half cycle of the loop. So I have to know what the range of that plane and its ailerons will do. If you meet a human being and say, "Are you an individual?" He says, "Yes, I am." "Tell me how to stop wars with your individuality." He doesn't know. He can only recite like a robot, unless he's been in a condition to say, "I have to do a study on that. I may be able to come up with an idea." Where did he get that? In school. So even those questions, you have to know. If I met a man from Mars, like I said, I would say, "What do you think I ought to know?" I wouldn't talk to him and say, "Do you want to meet my wife or my kids?" That would have no meaning. Anything that can travel, like I always say, 100 million light years through space is not like us. And they don't require a pat on the shoulder and say, "You've traveled that great distance just to get here?" They'll say, "Yes, we have." They're not interested in that kind of conversation. Can you understand that? All right. So I'm talking to you about the world today and the values today. Can we make a machine with feelings if we make it of organic material? If we can replicate life. Right now, there's a thing called colpoids, which was developed in Mexico about 60 years ago. Some Mexican took shellac, varnish, lacquer thinner, or mix it together, and a bubble formed, and it divided into two. Then the other one divided into two. They simulate organic occurrences, but they're not organic, they're not living. They don't move away from pain. All living systems that we know of, if you put a match near a moth or any other animal, it'll move away from it. If it doesn't, they don't exist, they get wiped out. There are many animals that did not feed their young, they just found food and ate it. They're gone. They can't reproduce. Do you understand that? So nature probably produced billions of experiments that didn't work, just like a lab or research. So when you meet another type creature, you always have to say, "What have we here?" And the answer is, "I don't know," until you measure that creature's response to heat, cold, water. And if it has no mouth and no asshole, if it can convert the sun's rays into energy, it's a different system. And you're going to have to, how do you investigate a system that has no input? You have to think of it. And if you can't do that, you can't analyze or predict. Science, theoretically, is the ability to predict the next most probable. when you understand science. You know how to go about and you know what to look for. Or you know that you don't have the equipment to look for it. I can't look up a germ's asshole with a microscope. I can only see the whole germ, but I can't get close enough unless I get another type microscope, super amplified. And if you gave it to the average person, they wouldn't know what they're looking at. So you'd have to know something about insects, something about what you want to know. If you just look at a man from another country, they're pretty much the same as us. So if you go like that, they know you want water or that. They know you want food. But if you meet a totally different creature from a different world, where their food comes from the sun, just energy, and you went like that, they wouldn't know what the hell you wanted. Unless they have a multiple orientation, which is possible but highly improbable. The orientation, as you get wiser and know more and learn more, you set aside the old. You don't look at a guy, he looks like a nice person. You don't have that value system. You say, of what use is the world to one another? Right now, it's me for myself. So it's of very little use to the majority, yes.
So I'm asking you to speculate a little bit here, but would you expect that any advanced type of organisms, machine, whatever it might be, that could come that far to here, would you expect or not?
I wouldn't know why they came either. I have no idea. If they're that advanced, they can make anything they want to make. They don't need to come here. Like the stuff I read about on the...
And if they did, that you wouldn't expect them to intervene or not?
No, not at all. If they needed energy, they can get it in the sun or the stars or meteors.
But they wouldn't intervene to help us out?
No, I don't think they can send them any more than you would turn to caterpillars and say, look, if you crawl on this tree, you'll just have to be picked off by birds. The caterpillar learns that, so there'll be billions of caterpillars and less birds. So do you like caterpillars more than birds? You must have an attitude about caterpillars. Or if you walk and say, I stepped on a caterpillar, and you can't sleep at night, you have a value system that's detrimental to your well-being and survival. If you step on a caterpillar accidentally, and you can't sleep at night, if you step on it deliberately, kids do that, because they have the power to do that. They can step on it, and they feel powerful. They step on it. Whole other thing. I think I told you I gave my little boy a grasshopper, and he had the leg in his hand. I said, what happened? He said, it came off. I said, did you help it come off? But he felt safer by saying it came off. But I understand, he wanted to see how well connected it was. He kept adding a little more force until it came off. And when a shark sees a person swimming, it sees a hamburger sandwich. It doesn't see a human being with a family, kids that are going to mourn his death. You know, the shark goes, food. I knew a guy like that. He was a cook. His name was Andre. He saw a pig walking. He said, boy, I love that cooked. And he saw it with an apple in his mouth in a big tray, silver. He was a cook. He cooked all kinds of animals. I can understand that associative, but when you think your associative system is real, that's when it becomes a problem. If it's not based on indoctrination, feelings that are superimposed over you, then it's the only thing you know. That's why I rarely listen to the average person when they talk. Rarely. Because they usually don't say anything. Except, I'm an American, I'm from Boston, oh, how nice. But they can't say anything new unless they're in the experimental area. Now, scientists are a little better than the average person. Not much. Because there's a lot of conditioning. They get medals for what they do. They get paid by General Motors for making something. If you make the best microscope, you get a medal, you're honored, you know what I mean. But whenever you think about people, think of the millions that gather on the sidewalk to see Kennedy go by. Kennedy to me is a nothing thing. He never said one word that would enhance my life. Well, people like Surya Goddess Chanda Bose made me aware of response in inorganic materials, which I was not aware of. The minute that awareness comes in, a whole lot of things collapse that you no longer have use for. You don't use words like, at least I'm aware. You can only be aware of what you can be aware of, but you can't be aware as such. If you learn to say, what have we here? I don't know even how to check it out, so I can't investigate it. But if I say, well, there's certain things that are meant not to be known, that's in metaphysics. Have you ever heard that? There are certain things that man was not meant to know. After you die, you get to know all that. That's why you got that little crease in your mouth. When your baby, an angel, puts his finger there and takes away all your memory. My mother told me that. Strictly, she didn't mean to lie. She was not a liar. She just didn't know. That was, she was programmed. And very rigidly programmed. And religion is a rigid programming system. And the better, the more survival religion has will be if you don't question anything in the Bible. If you do doubt or question, you're not going to heaven. So if a guy doesn't ask any questions, that keeps him on that track more like a program. Do you understand that? But if your religion is open, when you say to your minister, what do you think of the Lutheran Church? He says, they have some excellent points. If I were you, I'd visit many churches. He wouldn't have as big a congregation. So he says, we believe our congregation is right. Like the Church of God said, if you don't come to the Church of God, you can't get to heaven. All the other churches are superficial. It makes the attendance larger. Do you understand that? You got to remember, there are advantage positions that people have in getting food, shelter, and by talking and using those advantage systems, you can perpetuate yourself. That's what the free enterprise system is. Personal advantage systems, where you can perpetuate yourself. I'm not talking about good, bad, right, or wrong. I'm talking about different responses. So the way, in the early days, I had convictions about certain things. This is so and not so, and this is right, and this is not right. But reading changed a lot of my values. And once they started changing, I began to question everything. You asked me that before. What makes you ask questions about everything? There were things that interrupted my value, like Bose, that interrupted my value system. Pavlov said this, that interrupted my value system. He said, if I fed a dog for the first time, saliva flows, it helps the dog digest the food. In the morning when I ring a bell, if I feed the dog, every time I ring a bell, all I have to do is ring a bell and a little bit of saliva flows. Can you understand that? Now the dog sits by the door and listens in the morning for the guy to come in with the bell. When he hears the bed spring is changed in the morning, a little bit of saliva flows. It doesn't need to ring the bell. That's projection. Because the guy may not come in, may get out of bed and go fishing. Maybe Sunday, or he's not going to feed the dog. If you feed a dog, when you ring a bell, if you ring a bell and the dog doesn't get, the dog assumes he's going to be fed if he walks over to the bell. That's projection, because the guy may not feed the dog. And when you assume that your vacation will be wonderful, you didn't know the ship would catch fire and 400 people would drown. So a person says to you, have a nice voyage. Do you control fire on ships? No. Do you control sinkability of ships? No. Don't wish me anything, unless you can tell me something, yes.
Would you say animals project more or less than people?
They project more, by far, because if there was a tree full of food and they went there the next day, they may turn around and go back several times. Like a horse runs into a burning barn because it's the only security they know. Can you understand that? Now, killing a guy has less problems with that guy. If you live with a neighbor that annoys the hell out of you, if you shoot him, you're not annoyed anymore. But if everybody went around killing everybody, they wouldn't like, the civilization would fall apart. So they say you're not allowed to kill anybody unless we say so. Then you can kill that whole nation over there, wipe them out with a nuclear bomb, because we don't like those people anyway. Yes,
But people project a lot, and
they do project a lot.
it may be harder to determine and measure the amount of projection that takes
You
place.
can ask
in it.
them questions. Don't know that for sure, so we call it probability. The scientists say it's highly probable that it'll be hot in June and July. Highly probable means what the way they've felt it in the past was that way. And if you say it's highly probable that airplanes will get faster, because they've been getting faster. But if it's highly probable they'll reach a certain speed, bingo, that's where it stops. Then it means a person's very limited. That's why they use words like utopia. We've got everything. Things are up to date in Kansas City. You ever hear that song? We've gone about as far as we can go. That's a projected song by a very limited people with great limitations. You can't change human nature. That's a non-scientific statement. If you couldn't change human nature, we'd still be living in caves. Where do you get the changes? You couldn't put millions of people together in one country without them killing each other and fighting each other. What brings people together? Common threat. There used to be millions or thousands of Indian tribes. When the Americans landed, they took the land away from different tribes, so the tribes merged together. They can better fight back. Do you understand? US and England and France fought Germany, and Sweden and other countries. But if you didn't bring all those nations together, I don't think we could handle Germany. And the nations realized that. That's called predictability. That's what science wants, predictability. Everybody wants predictability. And if they had it, most people wouldn't get married. The average marriage today lasts 5 years. That's statistical. It doesn't mean your marriage will last 5 years. It says the average. You know what that means? Normal values. But I find if a relationship becomes extensional in different areas, you tend to perpetuate that. And rather than give up on another person that isn't learning, the best thing to do is to work on them and try to get them over to understand that rather than I quit. It's no use talking. Do you understand? If a person picks up some things, they can pick up other things. And if you spend so much time on it, you might as well invest time trying to turn them around. But if you know that some people take 10 years, you don't want to waste your time. So the main thing I'm trying to get across today is the difference between pre-programmed behavior and human behavior. Although it seems to be programmed, there's lots of other associations prior to the programming. Machines do not have prior associations. Unless you erase everything in the machine and put a new program in, then it'll sit still all day. And when the movie is over, you say, I enjoyed it immensely. The robot says that the minute it says the end. It says, I enjoyed that picture. If you say, what did you enjoy about it? Then you find out that it's a pre-programmed statement. Do you understand? People say today, I don't want to talk to a robot, I want to talk to a person at Sears about the problem of my microwave oven. A person, they can't tell the difference. First, good morning, this is Sears and Roebuck, how can I help you? No, you say, I have 2 children, one screams all the time, what do you think I ought to do? I don't know anything about that. Why do you say, how can I help you? You can't help me unless you know something about screaming children. So if you begin to examine your language, you'll find out that it's very crude and very backward. And you have to take other people and give them this type of information, otherwise they cannot converse with you. They can to a limited extent. And the more you identify with conventional language, the more conventional you are. In time, if you change, you must teach people this system, otherwise you'll lose contact. Do you understand that? I don't say you have to. If you don't, you'll find it more difficult. The thing that made me investigate things was reading some books and picking up things that changed my values. Then I began from then on to question all my values. That's the difference. I began to question things may affect a person where they say, boy, that book changed my thinking in some areas. But they never sit back and say, I wonder about the rest of the stuff I believe in. Whether it's good, bad, right or wrong, I don't know. How can I know? So you have to get a book out of the library. How do scientists know what they know? Gee, I never thought of that. That's interesting. Now the guy that reads that book cannot associate with his old friends if he's turned around. Or he'll try to talk to his old friends. He'll be straight. It won't work. If the old friend has an ego problem. If the old friend says, I know nothing about that, tell me more about it, I'd like to know more about it. Or where can I get more information? That's what it's all about. Not, well, you got your right to your opinion and I got a right to my opinion. That's an ego problem.
Jeremy Rifkin was talking about doing an experiment with mirror imagery of neurons, and there was an experiment with a chimpanzee cracking open nuts, and then some other guy just comes in and he sees the chimpanzee doing that, and he wanted to do the same.
They put some bananas outside of a chimp's cage, about 6 feet away, and put a pole outside the cage. The chimp eventually grabbed the pole and pulled the bananas over. That's associative memory. They had, if you have a stick and you pick it up, and you can see that your arm can only reach 3 feet. The chimp has enough neurons to extend that arm with a pole. Sometimes dogs don't. Dogs can't say, they'll keep reaching for it and they quit. But even if you put a long stick, the dog doesn't pick it up in his mouth and try to move the bananas over.
I'm talking of mirror imagery, meaning like if you have your arms crossed, then I will unconsciously cross my arms the same, or I will lean a certain way. Or if I have a great attitude and then you have a not so good attitude, why would it rub off on me? Is there some neurological connection, or what?
Well,
Is it contagious?
Did you ever hear the expression, monkey sees, monkey does?
Mm-hmm.
Humans tend to imitate. That's why they have language. That's why you speak Spanish. Your parents say a certain word related to something. And if you don't learn that, you can't grow up. Then you're mentally retarded. So humans tend to salute, and officers in the army, after they become officers, when they go to officer training school, they stand like this. You know what I'm talking about or not?
Yeah.
Okay. We tend to imitate people we admire. We tend to. In mannerisms, hand movement, you never adjust your fly in the
So is
presence
that-
of women.
Is that something that's learned
Yes,
or it's learned?
Yes. We
It's
tend
nothing
to
chemical,
imitate.
it's nothing
No.
mechanistic.
Well, the
or
mechanism
mechanical.
is you have enough neurons to pick up other things and associative memory.
I was just wondering, are you asking, is there a chemical or biological basis for the mirroring?
Yeah.
I think that's what he's asking. Am I
Is it
correct in that?
learned
We
or is
have
it
billions of neurons, and the identification is a product of humans mostly, although some animals have it. And that is the amount of neurons you have. And the very fact that you feel isolated from somebody else, if they do this every time they see you, you tend to do that back. You tend to, it doesn't mean you will. Now people that have lots of neurons that have become accommodated to the system usually repeat the system. They wave American flags, or they give a flag to a child and says, move it, so the kid moves it. If he sees everybody moving, he moves the flag. If everybody sits on a flag like that, puts it on, they do that. Like, if I'm hungry and I don't know it because I'm doing something, and if you take the cover off the pot while something's cooking, that becomes dominant. Hey, I want to eat something, you know what I mean? But if I'm preoccupied reading an interesting book and the smell of food comes in, the hunger was there, but it was overridden by what I was doing. So I wasn't aware of it.
Let's say you have a newborn. Does it initially start to mirror because it learned to mirror, or does it mirror because that's a part of the organism's normal
Well, the
response?
newborn doesn't mirror, it can hardly, I notice in my own kids and other kids, they move around and they're looking their arm move. Well, they didn't know they were moving it. Do you think you know what I mean?
So it seems to me that,
I wasn't a
that
kid.
mirroring, it sounds to me then that mirroring must be to a large
Becomes
extent learned.
modified too. It becomes modified. When they learn that they can move their arm to the right or left, they no longer watch it like it was moving on its own. But it's always moving on its own. And when children don't, they have reactions. They cry when they're in pain, and the gut burns if they eat something, and they grin, and it's a complete reflex. They're not, if the child could talk, it doesn't know, little tiny babies smile, and they laugh even. But you ask them it's a reflex at that time, and what makes them laugh might be anything. If the head fell off the father while he was talking to the kid might grin. Do you understand? Oh my God, tragedy. The kid can't do that. If the mother dissolved and fell on the floor, the kid might cry. Do you know what I mean? Because the mother is not there anymore. But the kid doesn't say, no, that is unusual. Can't say that.